This Art Deco waterfall-style nightstand, probably built around the 1930s, was on its way to the dump, but I decided to take on the challenge, see if I could work some magic and bring it back to life. It's definitely not going to be a profitable, high-ticket furniture flip, but I figured it would make some good skills practice, and hopefully I could get it back into a state that would make it usable again. This thing was rough. Like really, I probably should have left it on the curb rough. There wasn't much left of the finish, and what was still there just crumbled off in my hand when I touched it. It was missing big chunks of veneer. The veneer and ply panels under it were all separating. The side panels had warped away from the top, and that was all cracked and splitting because the original veneer that was on there had already mostly been removed. The veneer on the drawer was coming up, but the old Bakelite knobs were still with it, although they were missing some bits and had already been glued back together. This Art Deco handle on the door was probably the only appealing quality this thing had left. It didn't even have a back. I started to take things apart and decided that I should probably do a quick check for lead in this paint just in case. I get these swabs on Amazon, and all you do is dip it in some vinegar and then rub that onto the surface you want to test. If the swab or the surface starts to change to a red or purple color, then there's lead present. Luckily, this one stayed orange, so I was safe to proceed without needing to take any additional safety precautions than what I usually do when I'm refinishing. To keep breaking this thing down, I removed the door and unscrewed all the hardware and then gave it a good vacuuming to pick up all the dust and cobwebs. Before I get any further into this project, I want to take a minute to tell you about the sponsor of this video, Lumi. I feel like I've been searching for the perfect deodorant products since I was a teenager, and while I found a few over the years that are really good, for me, Lumi falls under the great or amazing category. I think I finally found my forever deodorant. I've been using their toasted coconut solid stick and their fresh alpine scented cream deodorant for a few months now. And I love how soft and not overpowering the scents are, but they still get the job done and they feel so nice and soft on my skin. Lumi is different from others because it's a whole body deodorant that actually works with your skin's natural acidity to prevent odors before they even start. It was invented by OBGYN Dr. Shannon Klingman, and Lumi is clinically proven to block body odor all day and continue controlling BO for 72 hours. And you can use it everywhere that gets stinky, not just your armpits. It's baking soda free, paraben free, and they have a wide range of aluminum free products too. They even have an eco-friendly nitrogen propellant and recyclable canister for their new spray. For a limited time, Lumi has a bunch of holiday bundles available on their website, so it is the perfect time to stock up. I'm actually going to be filling my teenage boys' stockings with a bunch of Lumi products because they need it, especially for their feet. And the fresh alpine smells like Christmas trees. Lumi's holiday bundles are up to 40% off, which is an incredible deal for new and returning customers. And just for my followers, they are adding an extra $5 off plus free US shipping on orders over $30 when you order with the link in the video description and use code KSCOTT at checkout. Thank you so much to Lumi for sponsoring this video. This foot was attached by a couple of screws through the bottom and one nail through the back. And when I was showing this piece on my Instagram stories just after I'd found it, someone messaged me suggesting cutting this one remaining foot in half so that I could use it on both sides. And I thought that was a pretty brilliant fix for this missing foot situation. I decided that starting with a chemical stripper to remove the paint from the veneer on the drawer was going to be the most gentle option, and hopefully I could salvage some, if not all, of whatever was under there. So I brushed on a layer of this eco-friendly green easy finish remover and spilt a bunch on the door while I was at it. And while those were soaking, I started assessing the separation issues on the frame. I scrubbed as much of the dust and old glue debris out of the seams as I could with a little wire brush, and then filled this one side and the crossbar on the front with a bunch of wood glue, and then used some really big bar clamps to pull everything back into place. Certainly not perfect here, but much better than it was. While all that glue started to dry, I turned my attention back to the stripper, which had worked its magic, and I was really easily able to scrape the paint and the original finish off of these with a flexible putty knife. Once I had the majority of that paint out of the way, I cleaned up the rest with this strip and clean afterwash and a scrubby pad, and then rinsed it all with some clean water. The two-toned veneer on the drawer front was gorgeous and looked like the lifting could probably just be glued back down, so I filled a syringe with some more wood glue and squeezed it up underneath the loose spots. I covered the seam with some painter's tape so that I could clamp it to dry without worrying about anything else getting stuck in the glue, and used a board to help evenly distribute the pressure of the clamps across the surface. This glue does take some time to fully dry, so I just left everything to set up overnight. The next morning, I removed all the clamps and everything looked so good. There were a few areas around the edges on the drawer where it looked like someone had already sanded, and there were a couple of tiny chunks that were completely missing. So I mixed up some of this epoxy filler stick in a dark walnut color to fill those in, and I'll try to camouflage the burned through edges a little later on. When the epoxy was cured, I sanded it flush and cleaned up the rest of the wood around the drawer with some 180 grit sandpaper just to remove any little splintery bits or marks that were on there. Now that I had the frame back together, I could start addressing all of the unlaminated layers of veneer on the side panels. I refilled my syringe and used that and my putty knife to separate anything that was loose or had already let go, filled in all the pockets with wood glue, and then again taped and clamped everything to dry, but only did one side at a time because I just don't own enough clamps to tackle this much at once. Again, I left my glue to fully dry overnight and then unclamped everything, flipped the table over, and repeated the same procedure on the other side, regluing the underlayment back to the frame and the finished veneer back to the underlayment. With all the gluing done, I decided I was finally ready to figure out what was going on under this purple paint. Since it was already chipping off pretty easily, I opted just to use my sander to remove the rest of it. And as I expected, I found what would have been the underlayment that was placed underneath the final layer of probably a walnut veneer. This is not wood that was ever meant to be seen. It's only there to provide a solid base for the fancier stuff that was on top. So it's got some knots and splits, and the grain isn't anything spectacular. To get this last little chunk of walnut off, I just soaked a rag in some water and then placed my garage iron, not my good inside the house clothing iron, on top and let the steam break down that glue so that I could get underneath it without causing any more damage to the base layer. Since the top and sides were in such bad shape, I decided that painting the whole body was going to be my best bet, and I could probably keep the door, drawer, and hopefully the foot all as wood accents. I mixed up some of this heavy-duty epoxy-style wood filler, which is the same stuff as Bondo, just from a wood finishing brand, and used it to fill in all the damage. I could have also used the same epoxy stick that I used on the drawer, but that has more of a Play-Doh consistency, and for the amount that I needed, this is just a bit more cost-effective and easier to get into the really shallow imperfections. Both filler options start to cure or harden immediately after being mixed though, so I only work with really small batches at a time to give myself enough time to actually apply it before it starts to set up. After about 20 minutes, the filler was hard enough to sand, so I started smoothing out the excess and removing the rest of the original finish that was crumbling away anyway with some 120 grit. Anywhere along the edges or details that needed a bit of reshaping, I worked on by hand to give me better control, and once I had everything smooth, I cleaned up all the dust with a tack cloth. To prime the areas where I was going to paint, I used this shellac-based primer, which is what I reach for most often. It's fantastic at sealing in odors and stains and will also create a good even base for the paint to sit over so it doesn't soak into the more porous areas like the filler spots and look splotchy. The shellac separates out of the white base, so it always needs a really thorough stir before you use it. And I like to apply it with a microfiber roller that I can toss when I'm done because it needs ammonia or denatured alcohol to clean it up, and it sticks way too well to metal for me to put it through my sprayer. When Mr. Salvaged got home from work, I asked him to help me by cutting a new piece of hardboard for me to put on the back and also chop that lonely foot down the middle, which apparently I was too slow to catch on camera, but I think that should work, right? I gave the primer a quick smooth down with a fine grit sanding sponge to get rid of any roller texture or lint that was left in it, and decided to add a bead of paintable caulking into a couple of the larger seams that I still had for a cleaner look. There were also a few spots that the bright white primer really highlighted for me, like this area of deep wood grain that I thought could use some extra filler, so I hit those with some of this spot and glazing putty from Bondo. While the caulking and filler dried, I went back to the door and drawer and wiped on a layer of this wipe-on polyurethane with an old sock to get the wood to show me what its natural color really was and get a nice seal coat to be able to start blending away the boo-boos. I had just enough of this sand dollar beige from Sherwin-Williams in their urethane enamel left over from another project to cover this one in a few coats, so I filtered that into my pneumatic spray gun and then tested out all the settings on some cardboard to get the right flow and really quickly sprayed my first coat over the box. This paint is durable enough to use on furniture as is without any additional top coating. It also touches up really nicely if it ever does get nicked, and it's super easy to clean up with just soap and water. I like to give it about 4 hours in between coats, so once the first coat was dry, I smoothed it out one more time with my fine sanding sponge and sprayed on the second coat just to fill in the coverage and finish things off. By now, the poly on the wood details was dry enough for me to start trying to hide all the damaged spots with this little paint kit. I've had really good luck with this on a few projects now. It comes with 18 different shades, so I just squeeze out a tiny bit of a few that are the closest to the surface that I'm trying to match and mix them together to recreate the color and grain that I'm working on with a brush. Once I had the base colors looking close, I grabbed this dental pick that I have and dipped it into some black paint to recreate the really tiny grain marks, just blending them out with my fingers or a little bit more of the base color as I went until everything looked right. And then to camouflage things a little more and richen up the overall wood tone a bit, I sprayed on a few layers of toner, which is just a transparent color that sits on top of the wood instead of soaking in like a normal stain does. After lightly smoothing out the toner and repair paint, I ended up wiping on 2 more coats of the polyurethane to seal it all in and protect everything. And in between those, again, waiting for things to dry, I brought the handle inside to clean it off. The metal of this is pewter with just a brass colored finish on the front. And then the separate ring is Bakelite, which is really old plastic. I scrubbed the metal with some Barkeeper's Friend and a wire brush, and then just the Barkeeper's Friend on the plastic so I didn't scratch it up too much. And since I didn't really want to put the broken Bakelite knobs back on the drawer, I had a look on Amazon and found these little metal knobs that I thought complemented the shape and design of the handle. And to get them all to match each other and bring the old guy back to life, I coated them all with some gold leaf colored Rub and Buff metallic wax. I couldn't avoid dealing with these legs or feet any longer, so I decided to trace the outside curve onto the inside cut edge to use as a guide, and then use my sander to try and match those sides up. Hopefully that makes sense. I mean, ideally, I'd have all of the tools and skills to completely recreate all of these curves and grooves, but I don't, so I was making do with what I did have. Starting with some coarse 80 grit to remove the bulk of the extra wood, and then just moving up through 120 and 180 grits to remove the rest of the old finish and smooth things out. And this is where I ended up. Again, not ideal, but I thought once they were stained and reinstalled, they'd look close enough, and it was a much better option than one missing leg or no legs at all. Now, to match the light maple to the other much darker woods, I first stained the legs with some of this Candlelight gel stain from General Finishes, and once that was dry, I sprayed on a few coats of the same color toner that I'd used on those pieces and sealed them with the same 3 coats of polyurethane. To hide the stain on the bottom of the drawer, I stuck down some peel and stick wallpaper and then conditioned the rest of the wood with some beeswax and hemp oil salve from Wise Owl and started pulling the rest back together. Okay, here's our reminder of the broken, busted, completely beaten up Art Deco waterfall style nightstand that I scooped up off the curb. And here it is now. I always seem to forget how long wood glue, oil-based stains, and polyurethanes take to dry, and how much longer that makes projects last. But I think altogether I spent 5 days working on this, 20 or 30 minutes at a time, but I'm glad I got to have a go at taking something that was truly trashed and making it back into a usable piece of furniture. It's still very far from perfect, but a million times better than it was. Thank you so much for watching along as I worked my way through this challenge, and I hope you picked up a tip or two to use if you want to try refinishing a piece of your own one day. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and I will catch you all next time.